The topic tonight is going to be one microphone. One mic for a few reasons. One, because you got to learn to capture drum sound with one mic. The more you know about that, the easier it is to set up multiple mics on the drum set. As you get that overhead down, we really emphasize more of the tubby part of the kit, the drums, the toms, the snare, the beef. And it kind of de-emphasizes the cymbals a little bit. And it makes the drums come out. It's alive. It doesn't sound dull. It's no EQ, and it sounds like it's got some top end. Now I'll bring in the kick and the overheads. So let's look at this from the position of you're at home in your home studio and you have maybe, let's say you have 4 or 5 different microphones. Maybe get a good kick, a good snare, and a good pair of overheads first. You do that right and you're golden. It's insane. That microphone is the same distance from the snare as the overheads, and when it's pointing away from the kit, we get the room, which is so cool. Ribbon. Three entirely different sounds. Complete different sounds that are all very usable in different ways. The ribbon, fat, beefy, a lot of low mids. We're going to move this mic up and down. Now what's going to happen is it's going to act like an EQ. The lower the mic gets, the more low end we're going to capture. Right away, you got more kick drum. Now, the higher it goes, the less low end and less kick drum we're going to get. Therefore, it's going to have more high end, more mid-range to it. Definitely more cymbal now. Go to the right. So we went from like hard panned to about right here, and we still have a nice stereo image. There. Just the way the overheads were, they're out of phase with the snare. Listen what happens when I flip the phase on the overheads. We hear the body of the snare come back. That's important, always check the phase. Today I want to talk about recording drums and getting a full, real rock sound with only a few mics. Okay, so there you have it. That is rock drum sound, 5 mics in a rock song that has good panned, doubled guitars, big rock bass, big vocals, and it totally works. We are live. What's happening, everybody? What's happening, everybody? Welcome back. Happy Wednesday. Happy Hump Day. Hump days are always good. Today we are going to talk about snare drums. Well, snare drum. Here's the concept. I was talking to somebody about a week ago that was asking me, they only had one snare. And they're like, how can you without always changing heads, how can you do some like little tweaks and whatnot to get different tones for songs? He's like, okay, my snare sounds great on this, but we do this other song, it doesn't sound good. And in lieu of going and buying a bunch of heads, because that's one way. Obviously, you could have your Ambassador, your Emperors, you could have your control sounds, you've got your Genera Dries, you've got your G2s. There's all sorts of different heads that will obviously change the tone of the snare, which is great if you want to go buy those and take the time. But if you just have one snare and you don't have a bunch of heads, there's still ways to manipulate that snare to get different sounds. And that's what we want to go over today. We're going to use a few different things. We're going to use we got some moon gel, which to me, moon gel, gaff tape, ultimately kind of do the same kind of thing. Moon gel's great because it's easy, but that stuff also disappears. That's why we always have rolls of gaff tape around, you know, because sometimes you just stick a piece of tape on it, great. Sometimes it's little tape with some toilet paper under it, whatever. Then we have some homemade stuff. This is a homemade one of mine that works really well, that gets a sound. We have a couple different big fat snare drums, one with a hole in it. We've got one without a hole, homemade O-ring. We're going to go through all this stuff and just see how it changes it. So we're not going to change heads. We're actually not going to change the tuning either. That's going to be, the first thing we're going to do is just the drum, which you heard Hal playing, is wide open. No muffling, ring, the whole 9 yards. That is our control sound, not the head. This is actually an ambassador, but that sound is our control sound. That is what we're using as a bass. Control sound. Yeah. Which unfortunately, I was trying that, but the hoops on that thing are too deep. So we're going to work out from being really ringy and totally wide open to different sorts of dampening without changing the tuning. Again, this is only one way of doing it. We could change tuning, you know, you got your heads, all of that stuff, but we're going to keep one tuning, one snare drum, and then see what happens with a track. We have a track we're going to play to. It's short, it's about 35 seconds with a couple different parts. So we'll hear each one of these sounds in some sort of musical context. And how much they change, you know, some will sound good, some might not sound so good, some will depend on what your personal preference is, and that's cool. But they'll all have an effect on the actual song. Because sometimes I find that when I talk to drummers, a lot of the times and I've been guilty of this too, so I include myself in this, that we tend to find the sound that we like of our drums with no relationship to a context of any sort of song or music. Go, oh man, that snare, that's my sound. Or those hi-hats, you know, those 16-inch really dirty hi-hats are my sound. And you might go play a funk tune and you need something more like Tower of Power and you need some 13s, you know. So we have a way of falling in love with our gear, and rightfully so. We all love this. I love big shiny cymbals, you know. It's great, but we have a tendency to, because we play so often by ourselves, to fall in love with certain sounds of our kit unrelated to context. So what I want to make sure that we do as often as possible is have some context to bounce our sound off of, and either make sure it's the right sound or learn how to manipulate whatever gear that we already own to get the sound that we need. And that could be the case with the snare drum today. Maybe you only have one snare at home, or even if you have a couple but you don't have a bunch of heads, and you need to manipulate that one or two drums, and this is some ways you can do it. Or sometimes you're searching for something new. You're like, man, I've had this sound. I want something new to inspire some new inspiration, and maybe it leads to new grooves, new fills, new parts that you then take into the band, and all of a sudden you got this cool new shit. So we're going to do that. So what I want to do first, we've already heard this, but I'm going to go in the control room. Let's go ahead and run through what we have here, and then we'll start piling on our different muffling and, you know, covering techniques here. All right, cool. Yee-haw. All right, hold on. I got to get this, turn this down a little bit. I hate it when I hit a button on the iPad and nothing works. Thanks, Hal. Appreciate that. All right, there we are. There we are. All right, so first off, let's do this. Let's, Hal, just play a groove, man. All right, cool. The setup we have today is pretty simple. We have an Audio-Technica ATM 250 in the kick. We have a 4050 stereo for the overheads, ATM 450 on the hi-hat, a A3000 on the floor, and the snare, top and bottom, we just went 57s. So it stays, I wanted to keep it neutral. Again, I picked that mic, even though I kind of prefer the Pro 63 over it in general. I think most of us, if not all of us, have either owned or used or still use a 57 in that area, so everybody knows what it sounds like. That way we're not getting any, color. You have a good reference to what's going on. So first off, this snare, Canopus 6x14 maple. 6.5 by 14 maple with 8 ply. It has a Remo Ambassador. We have no muffling on it. Just give me some snare hits. It's got a ring. It's not horrible, actually. And one thing with the ring is it's easy for us sometimes in, say, a rock thing to dry that ring up completely because maybe, oh man, it's too much ring, get rid of it. Oh, it sounds great without the ring. And then we go to play the track and the snare drum can sometimes sound small without some of that life because that life, that ring, that decay, a lot of the times, especially in rock, and especially if you have pan guitars or stuff like that, that ring will get eaten up by the context of the tune, and if we take that away, we lose some life. However, there's also plenty of times musically, and I think this track today that we're going to use is kind of just a kind of straightforward rockish tune, not a heavy thing at all, and it works with all this, so we'll get a good idea of how the decay in the ring affects the tune or how much of it gets eaten up in context, and then once we dry all that up. So first off, let's do the track with this setup right here. This is our basic setup, and we'll go from there. Ready, Hal? Here we go. Groovy. All right, so that's our basic setup right there. So notice the ring does get a little bit, we lose a little bit of that ring once the track starts, but the drum too, we're not EQing anything and we're not compressing. This is just a 57 over that snare drum. But, it's a 6.5, we should have some body in there, right? But we have a nice ring, so that's our starting point. So first thing, let's go with what we've all used before is moon gel or gaff tape or whatever you have handy, duct tape sometimes too. And we're gonna start just by putting it on the edge of the rim. It's really, hey, would you do me a favor? Would you just go grab a random snare drum? Actually the piccolo, it's on the bottom row, it has a moon gel on it. I'm gonna get one so I can show you where this is going. So like I said, the moon gel, we use it a lot. It's cool. I know the drum tacks are pretty bitchin' too. Gaff tape always works. If you're gonna use tape, go spend the money on some gaff tape and not duct tape because the gaff doesn't leave a bunch of crappy residue all over your drum heads, all over your gear. Thank you, sir. Yeah, perfect. All right, so here's where we're starting first. So he's got a full piece of moon gel. This is just a small one. But we went from wide open and he's basically setting it right here on the edge of the drum. We're really just trying to tame our ring. Say you get it, you're playing, you're like, man, snare sounds good, maybe you like it, but the ring is a little too much. Towards the edge won't really affect our tone too much, but it will hit the snare. Now take it off. We've got that much longer ring. Now put it back on just on the edge. The tone of the drum doesn't change too much. Actually, in some ways, the mid-range is a little nicer because we don't have as much of that ring, which is pretty pronounced. And that's just one full piece of moon gel right on the edge. Play a groove. Add some ghost notes. All right, now real quick, just so we know where we're at, pull that thing off real fast and just play a couple bars. All right, put it back on. Yeah, see, it just dries that tail up a little bit. All right, hey, let's try this with the track. So now let's see how this sits in our, with some context. Cool. Actually, I think that cleans it up a little bit and makes it sit in the track a little nicer. Now, one thing, there's some ghost note talk coming up. I agree with you guys that sometimes some of these mods and things you do will kill ghost notes. And that's a big deal if you're playing a pattern that has ghost notes. However, if you're not doing any ghost notes, it doesn't matter. Again, it all depends on whatever you're doing. And a couple of these things we're going to do are not necessarily good for ghost notes. But then I say that, and you know what? It might work. We'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, now let's take that moon gel, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to move this sucker in. Go about like what we did earlier. We're going to go in considerably. So we're going to go about that far in on the drum. Give me some snare. That's a significant change. Pull it off, and just give me some snare. Now drop it on. Now it actually sounds like a kind of a different snare drum. It's a big, not necessarily a tone change. Tone's changing a little bit, but we have no ring. Give me a groove now. Danke, JJ. Cool. Now, one thing too to note, I'm having Hal play everything center of the head today, which means he's really pissed off at me. And see, that setup sounds good with the rim shot too. But I'm doing it so we have it even, because some of the things we're going to do in a second don't sound that good rim shot, and I just want an even, consistent way so we know that we're not changing the way we're hitting the head, although that is, or hitting the drum, but that is also another way to manipulate the sound. So today we're going all center of the head. Everything is going to be that way. Yeah. I suggest everybody learn to play that way. There's a cool tones you can get with center of the head and then using rim shots for accents. Okay, track. I like the ending with the bell there. All right. Is it Spisho? Spishko. If I said that wrong or something, please don't get mad at me. Yes, much drier, but has not killed the snare buzz at all. Ralph, what's up, dude? Don't have a pearl in there today, but we'll get one next time. Kenneth Nam was good. Only went down for Thursday. We had sessions every day. Did a lot of sampling this weekend for some companies and doing a lot of drum loops and then vocals. So Hal and I went down together on Thursday, and it was a whirlwind, man, but it was fun. It was good. Did you go to NAMM? Okay, now we're going to get into some homemade stuff. So everybody's heard of an O-ring, right? This is another great way to dry a drum out but still not lose attack. Anytime you can dry the edges out but not have something in the middle means we'll still retain some of the high end and will also keep some of the, a lot more of the articulation of the drum. So this, hold that thing up real quick. I cut this out of, is it in, you can't even see anymore. I'm pretty sure it was an Emperor, but I don't know. Might be an Ambassador. Can you tell? Ambassador. So I just took an old drum head and I just cut out my own O-ring and use it. Now stick that sucker on and hit the drum. Now pull it off and hit it. So there's where we started. Stick it on. So this is even considerably drier than the play like a couple, just some rolls. So there's still good, you know, if you're playing some ghost notes or if you need to play notes, there's really good articulation here. And matter of fact, a drum dried out like this will, although it's very articulate, can be very unforgiving in your note placement because it's so dry to where if your notes are moving around at all, we're going to hear exactly where they are. When there's a little bit of extra ring or it's not quite as articulate, if our stuff's moving around while we're playing, it'll be a lot less noticeable. This is going to be very, where we place the notes is going to become very important just in our everyday grooves and whatever you're playing because it's gonna show your flaws if you have some. All right, give me a groove. It also changes the whole kit. Cool. This I mean, the last one dried it out, but now with this dry but still articulate, the whole kit sounds different. The hi-hat sounds different. The reaction to the kick drum, everything is different, which is going to make it feel really different when we get some track. You ready? Cool. I actually kind of like what happens to the whole sound now. It gets a bit more 70s. It's dry. It's not a real huge sound, but the snare has a good attack to it. But it's also, in a way, soft, kind of round. It's kind of nice. And that again, man, I'm sure everybody, you bust through a head, cut that sucker out, make some O-rings. I've also, I didn't bring any out today, but I have some where I made the O-ring, then I cut it in half, so it only does half the drum. Because some drums, you know, we could pull out the other 6x14 or 6.5x14 drums we have here, tune them close to the same way, put that same muffling on, and it will be completely different on my Gretsch than it would the Canopus. Sometimes you only need half of it. So take your old heads, recycle those into different muffling kind of devices that you can use. All right, now let's move into, let's go to your big fat snare drum. You guys, if you're hip to these are pretty freaking cool. And they make different combinations. This happens to be kind of an O-ring in a way. It's going to cover much more of the drums. It's only about a, what is it, about a 6-inch hole in the middle? Roughly. Kind of like that. So we're going to cover more of the drum. But go ahead and set that on there. Yeah, give me a couple more hits. Put the other O-ring back on, the homemade one. Put big fat snare. So pitch dropped. Actually, now we're adding a little bit of body. It's getting a little bit fatter. It's the dryness. It's probably a little bit more dry, but not a huge difference actually. Too much there, but it is a little darker. Play groove. Give me some more ghost notes. cool. Yes, it does almost sound like we brought up the snare mic. Now that's going to be an interesting thing as we get to these next couple. I'm not changing the bottom snare, top snare relationship. I'm leaving them where they were from the beginning. So none of that's changing. So everything we're putting on this head, if you start to hear more snare or less snare or more body, it's only from what we're putting on there. We're starting to add more weight to the top of the head, which is going to start bringing our note down a little bit, especially as we cover more and more of it up. All right, context? Nice. So we do have more body, a lot more body. It's actually, we're getting dark. We're starting to darken things up a little bit. It's harder to play? Why is it harder to play though?
Feels like the head is heavier, less response.
So when you're hitting it, it feels harder. Yeah. So imagine playing a whole tune that way. So it's going to respond, especially with the ghost notes and stuff, right? It doesn't have that same bounce off the head, right? It's a lot different, yeah. Now, we're going to move, now is the company how, I can't remember, it's called Big Fat Snare Drum, right? They make different variations of this in all different sizes, and these things are pretty cool. Now this is another one. The house is actually from a 13. So it's a little bit smaller, but it doesn't matter, it does the same thing. The one I've got here is 14. Now there's no hole in this one. And this actually has jingles on it, but I never really liked the jingles that well, so I just taped them up so you don't hear them. Having said that, you didn't really hear them all that much anyway, especially if you're playing center of the head. But now we're going to get into a totally different era because the entire head's covered. Give me some snare hits. Yeah. Try to play some rolls. So you still can, but it's harder, isn't it? It's a little splattier sounding. There's a little, actually the peak of the transient's a little harder to discern because it's not quite as sharp. Because we have, something about yay thick sitting on top of the entire head. Play a groove of this. More ghost notes. 2, 3. Actually, the ghost notes sound kind of cool. It's weird because you just there's like less attack going on there. Yeah, less rebound off the batter head for sure. Covers the whole snare. Yeah, Sam. Yeah, so we've got pretty much the same thing. Do you use the one that has the jingles or no jingles? I prefer no jingles, which is why I taped all of mine up. Sam, I did that in a music video I did years ago that we needed the snare to be quieter, so I had to take my damn shirt off. Cover the snare up. Yeah, there's a lot. Let's hear some context with this sucker. A lot of ways to do it. Now, one thing, the few times you hit ghost notes here, with this, they start to get lost in context. They just don't have there's not enough strength in those notes to actually cut through this They're almost more felt than heard, but we're getting more of the body of the drum. Now I want to move on to one of my favorites, homemade. Don't want to spend the money on some of this stuff? Great. Again, I'm sure you've got old heads lying around. So I took what is that? Ambassador X? Ambassador X, and I have 3 pieces of gaff on the back, just to add a little weight to it, and also so it stays in there. And I just cut the head out. Snare hits. Yeah. If you want to work on your double note strength, this would be the thing to do it. One, the thing is just sitting there, so it's not, it's not like the big fat snare drum where there's enough weight to where it's really laying on there. This thing is, it almost kind of moves a little bit when you hit it, so it's going to be a lot more splatty. It's going to drop the pitch considerably. Play a groove with it with some ghost notes. It's harder, isn't it? Now this stuff, I don't think you're gonna go do like Tower of Power gigs with this. This is almost in a way unforgiving with the ghost notes too, because the snare drum doesn't react at all. It's like you're just hitting a pillow there. Probably not the splash cymbal today. I'd have to go dig them out. We actually talked about that, but we'll get to some of that at some point. There's some really cool things you can do with that. All right, let's hear this, and this is going to make this track feel completely different than the others. So, whole different vibe. In a way now, after hearing all these, earlier when we were doing sound check, I kind of liked the O-ring, the homemade O-ring, but now I'm hearing this, there's something kind of cool about the homemade, big fat snare drum. Now, quick question. Kenneth was asking if you do a homemade one exactly the same size as the big fat snare, would it be the same thing? Probably not. Pull out my big fat snare, the 14 one, and then pull up the homemade one. They should be roughly the same size, depending on my cutout. Yeah, so they're close. I didn't quite get a perfect circle when I was cutting that out, but I don't think the material's different, and it's considerably thicker on the BFS than the Ambassador X, right? How's that? I mean, when you're feeling those there's more weight to that, right? I mean, you could probably maybe try an Emperor or what else? A Power Stroke, yeah. P77 even you could try. That might actually be a good one. It'll probably get you similar. So real quick while we're there, put the BFS on, the Big Fat Snare, and just give me a couple snare hits. And then put the homemade. So they're a little different. The BFS still has a little bit more top end to it. I'd say that probably has something to do with the weight of it and how it sits nice and flat and for the most part stays connected to the head, where the homemade one, there's not really enough weight for it to just like splat down on there, so it's a little splattier and a little bit lower in pitch. Now, one last thing, you can do all sorts of combinations with this. It all depends on what you're recording, right? Was that our combination we liked? Okay, so we're gonna leave the homemade, here, hit the homemade first. Take that off. All right, drop your BFS on. I am actually gonna turn, with that losing a little snare volume, I'm gonna turn the top mic up just a hair. Give me a groove. Now for me, actually, this is cool, but now the hi-hats don't sound like they're the right, they start to sound, as the snare drum gets fatter and thicker, the hi-hats kind of start sounding thinner, and those are 14-inch 602s, you know, they're actually pretty nice, but that part feels a little disconnected. We need some 15s or some 16s now. But let's hear this one in context. Play a groove again with the display. There's something cool about this. We have the wrong hats now though. But see what I mean? That I like this, again, it's really fat. I think for this kind of track, again, it depends on which way you want to go, and some of you guys will probably completely disagree. I like the fatter snares actually than I do the fatter and drier for this than I did the more open and ringy. Although I didn't mind the moon gel when it was about 4 fingers in from the edge. I think the drum sounds a little thicker this way. And all this, it's really, if you have a limited amount of snares to use, learn to cut these things up and either buy some of the big fat snare drums. There's the snare weight, which is great. And someone I think mentioned that actually. But the snare weight is really cool. I have a kind of a fake one. I don't know where we cleaned up the other day. It's a plastic thing that just clips over the edge and actually dampens the top. You could cut up old drum heads. You could cut up different thicknesses also to get different weight for your O-ring or half an O-ring, moon gel, gaff tape, whatever. There's a lot you can do without changing the tuning. You know, you could also, you know, another way we could achieve this, we could take the bottom 2 lugs, completely detune them, like completely. And you might have to tighten the snares up a little bit, but we'd get that same fat thing if you detune the bottom 2 and then leave all the others the same. If you have the resources and the time, even if you only have 1 or 2 snares, get a few different types of heads. You know, it's never hurts to have an emperor and an ambassador because they are definitely different. I like Genera dries quite a bit too because they dry things up in a really nice way without killing the completely killing the tone. What else do we use? That's kind of it. What, the HD dry? Yeah, there's one drum with the HD dry on it too, which is nice. But I kind of stick to, honestly, the control sound. That's another one I like. And quite frankly, for me, and I know everybody's different and drummers can get very eccentric in their head choices, I stick to, most of the time, it's going to probably be a coated imp, a CS, or a Genera dry. And I'll tweak from there. I'll either tune the drum down or up, or if it's a drum that has a smaller sweet spot, we'll do like what we did today. We'll drop different things on top of it to change it up a little bit. Or I'll pick a different drum with a different head, if you have it. But you can get a lot of mileage out of one drum. A lot of mileage, actually, if you do it. Punchy, yeah, I agree, punchy. No. Okay, Jonathan, everybody, just to reiterate this, there is no EQ and no compression on the snare at all. Actually, there's no compression anywhere except my lav mic. It's because I talk too loud. We do have a little EQ on the kick drum just to make it cut, and I'm high passing the overheads. But other than the snares, the only thing we did to change tone was to put stuff on top of it. That was it. Nice and clean. Just SM57 on the top, SM57 on the bottom, and that was it. Sphinx CS, yeah, it's hard to beat, man. There's something cool about just a control sound, you know, because it's either going to work, or if it's a little too ringy, a small piece of gaff can work. It's really bitching. Or if you're going for that crazy stuff, stick a big fat snare on there. So anyway, that's what we've got today. Try some of this stuff out. If you guys come up with a cool way, man, let me know, because I'm always into trying. Oh, Jonathan, what's the weirdest thing I've used to modify snare sound? Weirdest thing to use. I don't know. Other than using cymbals. On a kick drum one time, this is many years ago, because I had a teacher told me these things work, we actually would muffle the kick drums instead of putting full like pieces of cloth, you know, from top to bottom on the inside, we actually used tampons. old school tampons. You put them on, and they make great mufflers, man. We use it on bass drums, and it worked really well. Now we use EMADs and other things that work a little bit better, control things a little bit better. But anyway, guys, thanks. Let me know what you guys are using, man. I'm always interested in learning. I know some of you guys out there are probably doing some pretty cool stuff. So, Hal, what are you gonna do? You're gonna play out. What are you gonna give me?
Rim shot.
All right, guys, we'll see you. Oh, next week we're gonna talk about setting up a patch bay with your studio at home so you can use outboard gear like compressors, EQs, or different pre's. And I've had so many people ask me lately how I hook the board and the computer up and how it works that we're just gonna set something up from scratch so I can show you guys how to do it and make your lives easier. So we'll see y'all next week, man. Happy recording.